So I'd like to introduce our chair for this session, Mr. Yasha Hajayev, and he is the Associate Professor of the Computer Science Department, Ministry of Education, Western University. Thank you.
Thank you very much for introduction me. I represent here the Social Society of Azerbaijan, and I would like to welcome you to our one of the last sessions and in Baku, in Azerbaijan. Thank you very much for your coming and for listening to us. This week's discussed what the opportunities to maximize the opportunity for open and inclusive dialogue and exchange of ideas on critical issues. It was also an opportunity to try to create opportunities to share the good practice and experiences, to listen, engage in dialogue, and learn as well as identify key themes that could in future benefit from multi-stakeholders' perspective of the IGF. This session, taking stock and the way forward, will allow us to reflect on the overall summary of the 7th Internet Governance Forum, including the critical issues such as future of IGF and principles related to the governance of Internet. To complete this complex task, we will guided by the session's main moderator, Mr. Peter Major, and coordinator Constanze Bommeler, Internet Society ISO. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. We will begin this morning with an overview of the entire IGF. As a new development for this year, we will hear a presentation of messages from the IGF Cloud, and many ambassadors and fellows have contributed to this exercise. These messages are a synthesis of what has happened, what has been said online and in social media about the sessions and workshops this week. We will then have a brief summary of each of the 5 main thematic sessions that have taken place in this room. Next, the moderators will take us through a discussion on principles and frameworks for the Internet and Internet policy, inviting organizations from the floor to inform us about the way they had done their work on these principles. I hope all participants will think about how the IGF might address these Internet governance principles and prepare your questions, please. Last, we will discuss what is the way forward for the global Internet community and for the IGF. The moderators will introduce recommendations made by the CSTD Working Group on the future of the IGF. We are also only 2 years away from the WSIS Plus 10, the 10-year review of the World Summit on the Information Society, which of course will have implications for the IGF. Please remember, the goal is for the facilitators this morning to encourage contributions for all of you in the audience, so please be ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Constance. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to have an extremely interesting session, I hope, today, at least as far as the topics are concerned, are very exciting. And without much ado, I think we should start the first part of this session. Let me introduce you the 2 facilitators, Mr. Bertrand de la Chapelle, and the second facilitator is Mr. Kuzai Al-Shati. I ask the facilitators to start the first part. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. The purpose of this first segment is to ask rapporteurs for each of the main sessions to come and give a 2-minute summary of the discussions and the possible messages that came from each of the main sessions. We have 1 rapporteur for each, and I would like to ask first Janet Hoffman for the Emerging Issues session to give her report. Is the microphone the one that is outside? Or just behind you, yes. I hope it works.
Good morning, everybody. It's not on, is it?
It works.
And thank you, Bertrand. I'm reporting from the main session on emerging issues. This session discussed two topics. The first was the role of the Internet for disaster recovery, and the second was about free flow of information, intellectual property rights, and freedom of expression. The lesson from the first topic is the following. The role of the Internet must be understood in the context of the diversity of media available to generate and distribute information. Digital and non-digital media, including such simple things as paper and pencil, need to interact in order to create a local infrastructure that helps people to find each other and communicate vital information such as availability of water, roads, etc. Equally important, governments should prepare for disaster recovery by digitizing public information, providing information in a machine-readable format, by providing equipment and offering training. The summary of that is that the emphasis on flow of information is more important than that on information technology. The second topic was supposed to address free flow of information, freedom of expression and intellectual property rights. Instead, the discussion revolved around common principles underlying regulation. In particular, the panel discussed the principle of technical neutrality with regard to regulation. As a general principle, it sounds very reasonable to ask that regulation should be technologically neutral, and we should, for example, not treat one type of software differently than others. In practice, however, this principle faces tricky problems. One is that each generation of media comes up with a different tradition of regulation. Broadcast media, for example, has been heavily regulated, much more heavily, in fact, than digital media. Second, we have different regulatory cultures across countries. Privacy issues, but also regulation of hate speech, have been mentioned as examples of this second challenge. Against the background of media convergence, regulatory diversity creates many problems. Representing these different regulatory cultures, the panel could not come up with a common view as to how to address these challenges. One panelist warned against agreeing on the lowest common denominator, while other panelists emphasized the importance of free speech. It seems clear that these problems will stay around for a longer time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to ask Dr. Rohan Samarajiva to report on the Internet Governance for Development IG4D session.
Thank you. The Internet Governance for Development session consisted of three clusters: the pending expansion of top-level domain space, and secondly, the enabling environment, including investment and innovation issues, and thirdly, a related cluster on infrastructure. On the first cluster, there seemed to be general consensus on the need for the development of markets for CCTLD and GTLD domains. On the second and third clusters, there was agreement that infrastructure development issues should be dealt with through multi-stakeholder processes. If there was a degree of difference in the audience, it was with people particularly from the developing world seeing the second set of issues, being more important and being a precondition for discussions of top-level domain issues and such. A degree of sort of differences in emphasis. On the second and third clusters, emphasis was placed on the need to create the proper conditions for investment and an environment conducive to decentralized innovation, and at the least that governments, particularly at the international level, should be cautious about creating or putting into treaty level or other agreements anything that would be hostile to greater investment and would be hostile to greater emphasis on innovation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We now get to the third main session dealing with access and diversity, and I would like to ask Karen Rose to report on that session, please.
Thank you and good morning. It's a pleasure to report out on the Access and Diversity main session. I will keep my comments brief. I'd argue that the issue of access and diversity and the topics we discussed in this session are among the most important of the entire IGF. Because without access and diversity, few of the other internet governance issues that we talk about in this forum have any real practical impact. The MAG gave us 5 very challenging topics to cover in our 3 hours. Those were infrastructure, mobile and innovation, the empowerment of women and people with disabilities, free flow of information, and multilingualism. We aim to discuss these from a perspective of promoting human, economic, and social development in line with the theme of the conference. While it would be impossible to provide an overview of any one session in detail, let me provide you with a couple meta-level takeaways. In discussing the issues of access and diversity, we found that we must simply go beyond talking about rolling out connectivity, particularly in a binary proposition way of those who have access and those who don't. Infrastructure and connectivity is obviously a key prerequisite, and our panel did discuss these in infrastructure and mobility sessions in particular. However, it was recognized that in order for access and diversity to be meaningful, especially in the context of economic and social empowerment, we need to talk about the internet as a value proposition and take a broader view of how to transform the unconnected into empowered internet users, users into internet creators, and creators into innovators that will fuel the transformation of social and economic development. A couple of key themes that emerged from across the 5 areas we discussed was the need to discuss and talk about driving demand for the internet, how to make the internet experience a more relevant experience for users, including those that are vulnerable and underserved, and spurring the development of content. What's more, it was noted and what emerged is that the full range of stakeholders have an important and mutually enforcing roles in this access and diversity ecosystem. For example, we touched on what is somewhat of an untraditional role, or the role of government in increasing local content on e-government services in order not only to extend services and participation in the internet, but also to drive demand for the internet itself. In addition, we talked about NGOs providing last-mile solutions. So what we discovered is that no one stakeholder has only one box or one role to play in this ecosystem. One reflection is that it might be useful going forward to look at these issues from how to fuel the internet economy in general and empowerment in that internet economy. We found that the sharing of experiences in particular and real-world case examples across stakeholders was particularly useful. And we also found that the interactions between, and if I may say, more long-time IGF participants and the new faces, including from the audience and remote participation, were quite invigorating. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will close my comments, and it was a pleasure to serve as a co-moderator for this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. fourth session is security, openness, and privacy, and I would like to ask Alejandro Pisanti to report on that session.
Thank you, Bertrand. This is Alejandro Pisanti. A report from the sessions on security, openness, and privacy. Per the request I received from Constance Bommeler, I am also integrating some aspects of outside the main session, which give a more complete picture. The seventh meeting of the Internet Governance Forum held numerous discussions on the intertwined subjects of security, openness, and privacy. The subject was the theme of a main session and workshops, and also of interest in dynamic coalitions, open forum, and other discussions. The brunt of the attention was dedicated to the relationship between security and privacy, or more broadly this year, between security and rights, among which privacy is present with its own weight for its impact on other rights and as a symbol or even shorthand for these. The seventh IGF included many more rights-related sessions than any previous year. Statements about rights threatened by surveillance permeated a large part of the discussions. Continuing from previous years, the balance between opposing trends as well as views of cybersecurity serving instead of opposing privacy and liberties went on being the focus of many debates. In some of these debates, clear-cut cases and figures for state-driven surveillance were shown. Some of these are staggering, especially in view of the accelerated application of analytics and correlation that allow the de-anonymization of data captured originally as anonymous. In many cases shown, the justification for the scale of data capture and retention cannot be readily found. The impact of surveillance as a chilling effect on the rights of free expression and free association was underlined as well. Identity management, a key element of online security and privacy, was discussed. Among the most forward-looking contributions is a view of evolution from top-down owned identity, authentication, and authorization frameworks towards identity management based on multiple sources which only require a low level of trust in each. Openness was not intensely discussed in this intertwining of subjects. However, it was the subject of many discussions in which libraries and librarians play an increasing role in the Internet Governance Forum and of the Dynamic Coalition on Internet Core Values. The communities concerned with rights and with security have not been communicating enough. A call is made for further multi-stakeholder dialogue open to many diverse needs and points of view. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Session 5 is Critical Internet Resources, was co-moderated by Bill Drake and Chris Spain. Can Bill Drake take the floor to report?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bill Drake from the University of Zurich, and I was the co-moderator with Krista Spain of the Critical Internet Resources session. The session covered three big topics, all of which were fairly controversial and rather interesting, and I think we had a lively and vigorous debate on each. The first one was the question of the new GTLD program being pursued in ICANN and the ways in which some parties have received the prospect of 1,900 new GTLDs entering the root. In particular, the concerns that have been expressed by some stakeholders around the world, not all of whom have been engaged in the ICANN process, about particular types of strings, such as highly generic terms like .book, or terms having a pertaining to a regulated industry, or pertaining to culturally or religiously salient terms, or geographical terms, and so on. So we talked a little bit about how some parties perceive the possibility of these new strings being entered into the root, and what are the procedures that ICANN has put in place for parties to be able to raise concerns and challenge these decisions. We talked in particular at some length about the role of governments and the Government Advisory Committee and whether its authority was sufficiently strong or too strong vis-a-vis the finalization of these sorts of decisions within ICANN. And I think it's fair to say that was a topic that gave rise to robust disagreement among some parties, which is entirely normal and perfectly fine. The second topic that we talked about was a perhaps even more controversial one and a kind of an emerging issue, and this is the notion of establishing markets, secondary markets for IPv4 numbers. There was apparently a workshop, a feeder workshop, the prior day that had looked into this in some detail, and it had generated quite a lot of heat, and some of that carried over into this discussion. And of course the question is whether having markets and using market signals to reallocate a scarce resource could serve some purpose alongside the existing mechanisms for the allocation of IP numbers, or whether this was in some way going to undermine the existing frameworks or be inconsistent with the global public interest more generally. And parties had very different views on that topic, as one might suspect, and this is obviously something that we will probably return to again somewhere down the line, because there are those who think the issue will not go away, and that parties will continue to push for establishing some sorts of markets like this. The third and last topic that we discussed pertained to the upcoming World Conference on International Telecommunication that will be held by the International Telecommunication Union in Dubai in December 2013. There, the ITU members will renegotiate a long-standing international treaty, the International Telecommunication Regulations, and there's been much discussion as to whether those regulations might in some various ways impact the internet and indeed serve as a form of kind of multilateral internet governance. We had a great deal of discussion, in particular on the topic of proposals that have been made by some parties with regard to the economic organization of peering and interconnection, and the notion that perhaps one could move towards a sender pays sort of approach and have quality of service and other kinds of objectives built into the global regulatory framework. There is also a meta question that pertains to the boundary lines between telecommunications and the internet more generally in an era of convergence, when public switch telephone networks are all moving to being based on IP core networks. There were a number of other issues as well, how broad the regulations should apply to which actors, et cetera, et cetera. So this was a subject of great interest on the part of many parties and gave rise to a lot of vigorous debate as well. And I think there was a general consensus in the room among the folks here that the regulations should not extend deeply into the internet environment and should really pertain to the traditional realm of telecommunications administrations and recognized operating agencies providing international telecom services as they're traditionally understood. But of course, this is an ongoing issue, and we will have to see what is decided in Dubai by governments in December. So those were the three topics that were covered, and I think we had a really good debate on all of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. The last segment for this reporting. No, I'm sorry. This is at the moment a reporting on the main session, unless you are replacing Vladimir Radunovic. So I would like to call on Vladimir Radunovic to give us messages from the quote IGF cloud, i.e. the Twitterverse, and the comments that people made online during the meeting.
Thank you, Bertrand. My name is Vladimir Radunovic. I was in charge of coordinating the efforts of ISOC and Diplo Fellows, which were working on a report on discussions and trends in the cloud, meaning the tweets, blogs, and various other posts online. This is the first time we are doing it, and I'm quite happy that we also included it. And here is why. In the past 7 days, we had amazing 3,000 tweets related to the IGF. In only past 24 hours, we had about 1,500 tweets reaching out to approximately 2.8 million followers on Twitter, which is an amazing figure. And so to speak, we did have a parallel IGF with open and sometimes even heated discussions. The integral cloud content, which was aggregated, is available online. You can find it at igf2012.diplomacy.edu. Couple of highlights from the discussions. There were raised concerns on freedoms and rights online, including the online rights and freedoms in the host country. There were heated discussions on the enhanced cooperation, with majority of people noting that the IGF is an excellent example of the enhanced cooperation model. There were questions whether the internet is a human right and whether it should be considered a human right, and the debates were very polarized there on both sides. There were a lot of comments about WCIT, the ITU meeting in Dubai, and especially about the speech of the Secretary General of ITU, Hamadoun Touré, at the IGF opening, and in comparison with some of his recent interviews, which are available online. There were also other topics which are not that heated, among other women and children empowerment through the internet, searching for a better term than multi-stakeholderism, but also defining who are stakeholders and what should be their roles. And finally, dimensions of the internet for the disaster relief. There will be it in short, and I hope we are going to continue with these reports next year to walk the talk about the internet on the internet. Thank you.
Thank you, Vladimir. This concludes the first element of reporting. I will now pass the moderation baton to Kusai and encourage the members of the audience to also contribute on their taking out from workshops that they've participated. Kusai.
Thank you, Bertrand, and welcome you all today, this morning, and setting the session. I would like to open, after hearing the facilitators with their excellent feedback from the main sessions of the 7th IGF in Baku, I would like to give the floor to the audience for a question and answer. And I'll start with my dear colleague. Please, go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Subhi Chaturvedi, and I teach journalism and media studies in New Delhi. I also run a foundation called Media for Change. This is my first IGF. I was here in the capacity of academia and civil society, and I really want to use this opportunity to thank people who facilitated my presence here, because academia and civil society often get left out of the discussion. I think it is a life-changing moment for me, and Facebook has these events, live events. I think this is going to be one of those moments for me, because I know Vint kept hinting at the fact that Google Hangouts work, but we kept telling him that it's not nearly the same experience. There are just 3 quick points that I want to make, and I do believe that I would be failing in my duty if I didn't say this today, because what we do here today as a teacher, I think we owe it to our generations to come to make a stronger effort, because Bill just hinted at the debate around ITRs. My first intervention really is, we're here today at the IGF, which is clearly one of the most transparent, multi-stakeholder, accessible processes, and it's clearly bottoms up. If we take this to a platform which is not inclusive, which would not have people such as ourselves, I don't know, we could, if possibly the chair could do a show of hands, we'd know how many of us are going to be there in some of the most crucial meetings where decisions are going to be taking place. So that's one. To use this platform vis-a-vis a platform which is not multi-stakeholder, which is not bottoms-up, and is an intergovernmental body facilitating platform. The second, I have a submission to make, and I'm going to make this quick. I believe that one national IGF, and there are about 200 countries, it's going to take another 300, 200 years to get to each and every country for a national IGF. I don't think that's enough. the internet and the speed and the rapidness of change is so fast that we need to do a series of events, multiple events, regional events, national events. We've had an Arab Spring, we've had a bit of an Indian summer. If we could look at an internet governance movement, and at the risk of sounding repetitive, I will go on and say that what we need today is an internet governance movement. One of the sessions that I was in, I was asked what is at stake. I think what is at stake is internet and freedom. Two of the most important things that we cherish and care about. My third and last submission, and I'll wrap it at that, is the fact that a lot of us worry about dissemination and what we take away from this and the way forward, because this is closing and we're looking into the crystal ball and trying to figure out what more we can do. So if we could institutionalize best practices, if we could look at creating a platform where regional and national experiences could feed into each other, not necessarily become similar, retain their differences, retain the fact that they're special, but share learnings and create bridges. And that's what maybe the MAG or the IGF Secretariat could do for us, facilitate dissemination of information. So thank you everyone for giving me this opportunity to be here and meet such amazing, wonderful colleagues and peers and be a part of this experience. But I do believe that we owe it to ourselves to make this into a movement and keep knocking at the doors to preserve something that is so special and important. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments from the floor? Oh, the floor looks okay.
Thank you, Kuzai. Just to keep the dialogue moving and get more people warmed up to make comments, I thought I should step in. But meanwhile, I would like to, I saw the wrap-ups from different sessions, and I recognize that the working group on IGF improvements had very few real recommendations. But one of them was that the whole agenda should be structured around clear policy questions, and people should respond to those policy questions and frame alternatives. I did not really see it happen in that manner, and I do wonder why would MAG not have already taken notice of those recommendations and started off working on it. I do realize that the recommendations get finalized when the UN General Assembly would adopt them around December. But I mean, this is something which we had already inside the MAG, people have started to talk about. And was there a attempt to do it, or finally when implementation it didn't happen, or where are we on that particular recommendation of the working group? Thank you.
And thank you, Parminder. Any further comments from the floor? No?
Good morning, everyone.
Sure.
I'm Jonas Mäkinen, representing
I'll take this
Youth
question
Coalition on
first.
Internet Governance here.
No?
It's been quite many years since we young people started wondering how we could be more active in IGF, and I have to say that things have gone much better over the few years. And I would like to just mention a few things what we have noted this year about youth participation on internet governance. It has been wonderful to see how much more actively we have discussed youth, their importance in this discussion, taking opinions into account and acknowledging that they actually have something important to say. But as some feedback to the IGF in general, I would sadly still have to say that IGF still suffers from sort of a youth showcasing. So instead of having many young people as participants in general, there seem to be some panels which are specifically made for young people, as in, here they are. And this is something that really shouldn't be there. Young people should be out there and going to workshops they're interested. Okay, so what's stopping them from going to the workshops they're interested in? It's mostly because the essence of IGF and that it goes all around the world, which means traveling. It's in English and not everything is translated. I think it especially blocks young people from joining because of language barriers, because it always needs some sort of a backing organization or a funded project, like the Youth IGF project that we've seen here, to actually get them here on location. It's getting better, of course, now that we've seen Nordic Youth, we've seen UK, we have Net Mission Asia. It's getting better and better, I think. But in general, IGF could perhaps do something to make it easier to join here. For example, I don't see local youth here. It could have been possible in many situations, but IGF, I suppose it's just not marketed as in, hey, we have this important event happening in your country, in your city, and this concerns your normal behavior, everyday life, or at least will in several years. Would you be interested to come and share your views? Especially as there are many people from abroad who don't know how you behave and what you want from the internet. A few more points is that where people are discussing youth or even children, I would want to stress that especially there, young people should be there. I've been into numerous child protection panels, but you don't see young people there. You don't see children there. I think it may get very much on the wrong path if we don't actually check what the children and young people want or are after. And that's pretty much it for the general picture. I do want to say one copyright anecdote, though. It appeared that we discussed a lot about copyright and blocking and several of these issues that we are discussing here with adults as well. And it seems that youth want attribution and access came out to be a very specific point. Also, young people should be able to learn the positives and negatives of the internet. They should not be restricted by blocking.
If you can wrap
this
up,
is something that comes up in every discussion with young people. Thank you.
Thank you. I will just give the floor to my dear colleague Peter Major to reply to one of the questions that was presented from the floor. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to reflect on the intervention of Parminda concerning the implementation of the CSTD recommendations, the working group recommendations. Parminda, you rightly pointed out that the recommendations are about to be accepted by the General Assembly in the coming days. So even though we really wanted to conform to the recommendations within the MAG, we weren't mandated to do so, so we had to go about what we had. Now, I can promise you that in case, and I hope it will be accepted, we shall try and implement most of the recommendations, if not all. And I hope that in the next IGF you won't have the same question. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Another one? Please.
Yeah, I know I've had my turn and I don't really want to be too greedy, but I think
yeah,
it's a
I'm Siva Subramanian from Internet.
So, Shiva, I'll just wrap up. Just a tiny little intervention. I think the point that the gentleman raised before me about the question of involving youth, because this is about the internet. We've just put together the first India IGF and we dedicated out of the 2 days, the first half-day session to a debate which involves students from across 24 leading technology and communication institutes. I do believe that when we ask this question, which is about protecting vulnerable communities like women and children, a lot of these debates leave the youth out and leave these very stakeholders out. If they will not come to us, we will have to go to them. We will have to, because this is innovation, this is bottoms up. We'll have to create events that engage them, whether it's through debates, whether it's through public participations or public hearings which involve the youth. We're at www.iigc.in, and I would request, what we've done is put together a readout which is a summary of all the sessions that we've done and the processes. If the MAG could coordinate with some of the other IGFs and do a similar process-oriented document where we could learn from some of these experiences and also make an active effort at engaging with both youth and gender. I saw a lot of panels were gender balanced. Some of them had more women than the others, but this is one submission that I had. Thank you for giving me the floor again. Thank you.
Please.
I'm Siva Subramaniam from Internet Society India, Chennai. There are some participation issues discussed, and some talk about the disconnect between national IGFs, regional IGFs, and the global IGF, and some language issues discussed. And the solution could all come from going online, going to the internet. If we have, between the IGFs, if we have a continuous internet governance forum 24/7 online as some kind of an expanded Google Hangout for all participants to continuously interact issue by issue in an organized way, I think all this disconnect could be removed, and we can have some continuous activity and can have real outcome. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Hello. My name is Etienne. I speak in French. On est en train de parler d'accès et depuis fort longtemps, ça fait environ 2 ans que je visite le site du secrétariat de l'IGF et j'ai toujours constaté qu'il est dans une seule langue. Et cela est véritablement un problème pour la participation de ceux qui n'ont pas l'anglais comme langue de communication. Donc la recommandation que je voudrais faire est la suivante, celle de véritablement rendre le site du secrétariat de l'IGF véritablement un site multilingue, que les documents qui y sont puissent être traduits dans les 6 langues au moins de l'ONU. Et l'autre chose que je voudrais ajouter, c'est par rapport à la campagne de communication grand public. Il y a quelques années en arrière, 20 ans, nous avons vu la campagne de sensibilisation sur le sida et elle a porté ses fruits. La terre entière a été sensibilisée. Pourquoi ne pouvons-nous pas nous inspirer de ce modèle pour véritablement mener une campagne de sensibilisation en ce qui concerne la gouvernance de l'Internet? Merci.
Thank you. I think we are reaching the end of the question and answer session. Therefore, allow me to give the floor to my dear colleague Bernard to have an intervention to wrap up the question and answer session.
Actually, the idea is not to make a summary of things. One of the objectives of this session is also to try to aggregate messages and short elements. And we need to improve the system on an ongoing basis to facilitate the drafting of the report of the chairman at the end of the IGF. And I would like to practice by example by providing a few keywords that I think have structured some of the things that I have attended or participated in. One keyword was clearly enhanced cooperation, which became less of a taboo thanks to a pre-event. And it has been discussed in the IGF, and significant progress, I think, has been made in both the understanding and how it will move forward at the IGF and outside. The second keyword that has not been mentioned but that has percolated is big data. Big data and the cloud are two themes that have connections and that may be taken into account for future discussions in setting up the agenda of the IGF. The third element was some new principles are emerging that are specific to the internet. They are not accepted by everyone, they are not agreed upon by everyone, but they are moving one step further in terms of implementation. That includes things like the Council of Europe no transboundary harm principle, which is not accepted everywhere but is emerging, or the question that the Brazilian Marco Civil is envisaging regarding the neutrality of the logical layer of the internet in issues of blocking. And finally, the wiki has been a big issue, allowing people to educate themselves about what this process was and what its challenges and opportunities were. I think it's an illustration of one of the missions of the IGF, which is to monitor, as its mandate requires, whether other processes and organizations follow or not, and to what extent, the WSIS principles in discussing policy issues and governance issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Bertrand. In a nutshell, or in a synthesis of what the facilitators or the moderators of the session said so far, I think when it comes to emerging issues, we have talked about the role of the internet in disaster recovery and the important to understand the role of media in enabling people to communicate and connect with each other, and with a focus on information flow as an important factor when it comes to disaster relief activities. Also, in the same session, technical neutrality has been discussed in terms of regulations, where it should be maintained and preserved. Moving to the IG4D, the key points focused on the importance to develop a domain name industry, not only on the level of GTLDs, but also on the level of CCTLD. The discussion also focused in the developing of infrastructure, it focused mainly on IXPs, and where also the process should be multi-stakeholder, transparent and inclusive. And the last point in the IG4D was the point was discussed, that is creating the proper conditions for investment and the right environment for innovation. Moving from there, going to access and diversity, major issues was discussed related to infrastructure, mobile, women, innovation and the flow of information. The secession focused on that access should go beyond the mean to provide connectivity. It should discuss internet as a valued proposition for economical and social transformation, as well as the role of governments enrolling the demand of the internet and the role of civil society in doing the last mile in that respect. Moving from there, for security and privacy, the relationship between security and rights was a major point of discussion. Many has discussed that the rights has been violated by surveillance. Identity management was discussed also as a tool of security, and many has expressed that the issues of rights and security has not been addressed enough within the IGF. Going to the CIR secession, one of the major points that has been discussed, that not everybody was invited to be involved in the process of GTLD that was initiated by the ICANN. Many also has discussed the role of government within the GAC in this process, and the issue of secondary market for IPv4 was also discussed, and whether having secondary market will be in the interest of the public or the users of the internet, not only for IPv4 but for any upcoming resources. the other or the third issue was within the light of the wicket, and that would regulation impact the internet, especially within peering and interconnectivity, and there should be a borderline between communication and the internet. And there are views that regulation should not extend deeply into the internet area. Moving that to the IGF cloud, the IGF cloud discussed major points like the online freedom, discussion on enhanced cooperation, human rights, and the wicket, of course, was a part of the discussion on the IGF cloud. And to wrap up, obviously, you have a discussion from the floor on having something related to IGF movement, the disconnectivity between the regional, national, and the global IGF, and a point that has been discussed about the institutionalizing best practices. So in a synthesis, a nutshell, this is in 5 minutes what the discussion, a summary of the discussion that took place. This is the end of the first part, really, of setting the scene session, and I'll be passing the floor to my dear colleague, Anne Carblanc. Thank you.
Apologies. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. We are going to discuss statements of principles and recommendations related to internet governance. We all know that our societies increasingly rely on the use of the internet for a wide range of essential economic activities. But the benefits of the internet go far beyond its economic benefits. Worldwide connectivity is a catalyst for social welfare and for development, from education and health to participation and democratic reform in all countries. But for the internet to continue to be this incredible platform for innovation, social progress, and economic growth, access to and free flow of information is vital, as is the protection of fundamental rights and other essential values such as freedom of expression, of association, protection of privacy, of children, of consumers. I wonder if someone would disagree at this stage. We'll see during the discussion. There are many principles and frameworks related to internet governance. The Civil Society Internet Governance Caucus provides links to 15 of such statements of internet rights or principles for the internet society or economy. But there may be many more. We don't really know how many. Those which are most frequently referred to exist in English. And as one of the intervenants said, language may be a barrier to our knowledge. When we look at all these texts, we can see differences. Differences in the mode of development. Some of these initiatives are unilateral, others are collaborative or even multi-stakeholder. And I would cite the Brazil Marco Civil da Internet as one multi-stakeholder, very interesting model. The source varies. Some emanate from international organizations like the UN. Some emanate from governments like the UK Principles for Use of Cyberspace, from civil society like the Geneva Declaration on Internet Freedom by human rights defenders and civil society, or from business with the ICC policy statement on the freedom of expression and the free flow of information on the internet. The approach or the perspective also varies, whether it's economic, like the OECD, or human rights oriented, like the Council of Europe. The focus also varies. Some of these statements are constitution type texts. Again, the Brazil Marco Civil da Internet is one such internet bills of rights. Or others are sectoral, like the International Code of Conduct for Information Security proposed to the United Nations by Russia, China, and other countries. At high level, however, there are some commonalities among the different sets of statements and recommendations. For instance, several refer to international founding instruments like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is the case of the WSIS Declaration, which makes a specific reference to the right to freedom of expression in the information society. But this theme is also developed by the APC Internet Rights Charter, along with Internet access for all and privacy. And these three principles, along with the global free flow of information, openness, and multi-stakeholder cooperation, are present in other instruments, including the Declaration of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe on Internet Governance Principle and the OECD Recommendation on Internet Policy-Making Principles. The Brazilian Marco Civil da Internet brings the principles of inclusive Internet and access to public information, transparency, and social participation, which in turn, but enough for me. I propose that we hear more on some of these initiatives, perhaps from the assistants. First, however, I would like to call on Wolfgang Kleinwächter to present a brief synthesis of these principles for Internet governance.
Yeah, thank you very much. And indeed, we have a proliferation of principles. I think 10 years ago, people were very skeptical about principles because this was like an invitation for regulation and doing it in a very early time and to probably then to block further developments. But now, 10 years later, we have learned something, and I think there is a broad recognition that in principle, principles are not bad. If they are very high level, if they are non-binding, and if they include all stakeholders, they could give us a guideline and could strengthen the commitment of the various stakeholders to follow, certain very general rules like, internet should promote human rights, internet should be free and open, internet policy should be transparent and based on the multi-stakeholder model, the architecture should be end-to-end, the internet should be safe and secure, very general principles where everybody can agree. And indeed, these very general principles are already reflected in nearly all these documents which were just outlined here. So from the OECD to the Council of Europe, from Bill Hague's principles to the G7 principles to the various other groups who have done this. I have counted 25 and more declarations of principles meanwhile. And we have reached now, after 2-3 years discussion of principles, a moment where we have to think about, what is the next step? What we see is now a patchwork regulation where everybody just picks the principle he likes. So it's like principle shopping because we have too many of them meanwhile. So the proposal we discussed in the Internet Governance Caucus is it would be very useful, to have as a first step a compendium so that we have an overview about, what's going on, and then to figure out in a second step where we have consensus among these various principles, where we have rough consensus and where we have disagreement. And probably in a process of the next 3 or 4 years, we could move forward to such a framework of commitments on a very general level, which includes all member states of the United Nations and all stakeholders, because these are the weak points of a lot of these existing declarations. I chaired the working group in the Council of Europe. The Council of Europe was very open for multi-stakeholder involvement, so we were listening to civil society, to the technical community, to the private sector. But at the end of the day, it was the Council of Ministers which adopted the document, and the Council of Europe has only 47 member states. So it is not universal. What we have to have at the end of the process is a universal document which includes all member states of the United Nations and also all stakeholders, not a governmental declaration. There is no need for another governmental declaration. We need a multi-stakeholder declaration where we have the commitment from the Chinese and the American government, the commitment from ICANN and the IETF, the commitment of Google and Facebook, and the commitment of Human Rights Watch and the APC that they agree that the internet should be free, open, transparent, multi-stakeholder, safe, secure, etc. I think this is a challenge we are facing now, and I think the MAC is probably, for the moment, the only place where this can be further discussed in detail, because the MAC has a certain legitimacy. The MAC members are appointed by the Secretary General of the United Nations, and the MAC is a purely multi-stakeholder body. Do not send it back to an intergovernmental body. This makes no sense. We have to move forward in this uncharted territory of an emerging multi-stakeholder policy model, and I think this is the way forward. And my understanding is it would be good to go to the concrete proposals now, so that we have more knowledge about the ideas behind the various proposals. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wolfgang, for this brief intervention, but very passionate and perhaps convincing. Please, can you give your name and introduce yourself?
Okay. My name is João Carlos Caribé. I'm from Brazil, from Movimento Mega, and I bring some news about Marco's view of Internet, and so this is not big news, not good news. I speak on behalf of 3 organizations of civil society in Brazil: Article 19, Jipopai, and Movimento Mega, and Aka Mega Não. Marco Civil, Framework for Internet Rights, the multi-stakeholder legislative model, serious threatened. The Brazilian Parliament has recently disappointed civil society by approving at the same time 2 cybercrime laws instead of the guarantees for civil liberties on the Internet that was also in discussion. We, activists and the civil society organization in Brazil, had believed that the Marco Civil was an example of the best practices in the digital environment and showed how Brazil was in the vanguard in terms of rights and freedom on the Internet. Regarding the participatory process of the bill discussions and the conception as well as the content of the proposal itself, it seemed that this was on no going back highway. Unfortunately, this project is seriously threatened by the powerful lobby of strong economic groups. The foreign companies following the agenda of ITU are fighting hard against net neutrality. And the cultural industry presses strongly for a mechanism that allows greater control over what publishing on the Internet. This pressure has caused the adoption for 2 laws of cybercrimes and the parties of the Marco Civil again and again. Today, the Internet in Brazil is less free than yesterday. For this reason, we call the international community to support or strive for the maintenance of this regulatory framework so expected by all. Thank you. Signed by Article 19, Jipopai, and Movimento Mega. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Caribay. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to take the floor?
Good morning again. My name is Alejandro Pisanti from UNAM, Mexico, and the IGF chapter in Mexico. What I just heard from Wolfgang Kleinwächter makes me both very interested and more than a little bit concerned. I will reply very briefly. Let 10,000 commandments bloom and collide. And we will realize at some point that it may be a fool's errand, an unachievable task to get to a single set of principles at the highest level that is not the same as the single set of principles at the lowest layer of the Internet, which basically says interoperability, openness, end-to-end principle, and not try for the Internet to be the playing ground where we solve problems that we have not been able to solve in layer 8. The final aspect that concerns me very much is that in a logical consequence from what Wolfgang has stated, it would seem that he would like to see the MAG, the Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group, become the constitutional assembly of cyberspace. I think it's not equipped for that.
Thank you very much. There may be questions in the audience, but before we come to questions, is there any comment from someone, representatives of organizations or governments or civil society who have participated to elaborating statements? Yes, thank you very much.
Is this working?
From UNESCO? Okay. Right. I'm Guy Berger, Director for Freedom of Expression and Media Development at UNESCO. I thought I should just update people here about UNESCO's position on this question of principles and codes, because it was an issue. I think many people here will know that UNESCO started working on information ethics already back in July 1995, talking about legal and ethical aspects of access to electronic information, and then was involved in the 3 info ethics congresses that took place. And subsequently, UNESCO got the responsibility for WISIS Action Line 10, C10, ethical dimensions of the information society. So following that, various regional info ethics conferences were organized in UNESCO's regions. They took place in Dominica, France, Mauritania, South Africa, and Vietnam. And then the results of those regional conferences began to inform other work, which included work by the 28-member state body, sub-body of UNESCO called the Information for All program, which developed a code of ethics for the information society. This code is based, it says its foundation is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it points out that the code needs to be multifaceted in line with the internet being multifaceted and multi-stakeholder. The code was presented to the UNESCO General Conference of 195 member states, which noted the work on the code by the IFAP, but did not adopt the code. More recently, then, UNESCO has been working on more specific things, such as the relationship between privacy and freedom of expression rights and the ethics therein, including the global study that we launched at a workshop here. The scope of ethical issues of the internet are obviously very vast and will continue to change. As far as UNESCO goes, we are not doing a lot of further work on big principles as such, but we are trying to continue to promote debate around these issues, around ethics and principles, and doing stuff around promoting info ethics, particularly at school in media and information literacy. We also will continue to work with partnerships and promote debates such as multi-stakeholder events. Particularly, I'd just like to draw people's attention here to the WISIS Plus 10 review event on the 25th to 27th of February in Paris next year, which will include specific workshops on ethics in regard to the information society. So that's the future orientation of the work of UNESCO on this question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was someone on my left.
Hello, my name is Elvana Thaci and I work for the Council of Europe. I'd like to highlight one of the dimensions of the Council of Europe Internet governance principles, and that is their openness dimension. The Council of Europe principles were adopted by the Committee of Ministers. 47 member states did adopt them, but they do genuinely offer a very distinct openness dimension. And this is embedded in the letter of those principles and in the spirit of their declaration. I'll just highlight 2 elements which demonstrate this. First, the principles explicitly state that they do not represent an isolated action by an intergovernmental organization. Instead, they build on the acquis that different internet communities have progressively developed through dialogue, through efforts to pronounce the core values of the internet, through policies and guidelines on different aspects of internet governance. Secondly, the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe explicitly stated that this was the Council of Europe's contribution to an ongoing, inclusive, collaborative and open process of development of internet governance principles. So the Committee of Ministers said that this does not stop here at this particular statement. It invited instead all stakeholders to embrace the principles in the exercise of their own responsibilities. And by the way, the Council of Europe principles exist in 4 languages, in English, French, Russian and German. They are available on the Council of Europe website. 2 words about the follow-up to the principles. In spring this year, the Council of Europe adopted an Internet governance strategy for 2012-2015, and there it mentions as an action line the development of a framework of understanding or commitments based on Council of Europe's values and principles on Internet governance. We will start very soon looking at the implementation of this action line. The steering committee, the Council of Europe Steering Committee on Media and Information Society will discuss next steps at the end of November this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any other intervention on a statement, a set of principles from the floor? Before we take the questions, no more. Do you want to intervene for?
Well, yes, but not specifically on this statement of. But then I would wait for them.
Okay, so perhaps now we can take questions. Then, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm sorry to take the mic again because the first time I just came in because there was nobody coming up. This is more substantive. I'm Parminder from IT for Change. Partly it's about principles statements. We had a dynamic coalition on framework of Internet principles formed at Athens, and which later merged with the dynamic coalition on Internet rights, and now there's a dynamic coalition on Internet rights and principles, which has a very elaborate statement and also a short statement of 10 principles, which has been introduced at various times, and I would not talk about it, but if there's time later I would talk about it, because I have 2 other issues which I wanted to comment on. About principles, the one issue I want to talk about is that we have some plurilateral groups making Internet principles. OECD has made last year principles for Internet policy making, and Council of Europe, we have heard, have made principles for Internet policy making by perhaps some other name. They all welcome initiatives, but I think it's important when these plurilateral initiatives are going ahead, they should not oppose multilateral UN-based initiatives of a similar kind, of similar intergovernmental processes taking multi-stakeholder consultation along, with no difference in the model, and I want to insist, no difference in the model. And the same people resist those very badly, badmouth them and support plurilateral things, and those plurilateral principles then are actually taken to other countries and promoted as, you take it, or otherwise, internet ecosystem is too global for you to want to fall off it. So that's the main thing I want to talk about. Second, about Wolfgang's the proposal that MAG should take up. I do not often have occasion to agree with my dear friend Alejandro, but I'm going to agree with him on this point. I have been a great supporter of recommendations, working groups by IGF and all those things. These were the proposals which put forward to the working group which Dr. May headed. These proposals, when we put forward, were not accepted. They were rejected by the working group, and therefore they are not in the recommendations of the working group. And I would hope in the same way they meticulously are observing that the policy issues would not be taken up till the actual GA recommendation comes, they would also not go beyond the recommendations of the working group on IGF and not do working groups of the MAG, not set up MAG into principles making body. And I repeat, I'm a great supporter of these things, but these proposals made by us were rejected by the working group, and they should now be adhered to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next.
I'd like to bring to everyone's attention one of the outcomes of a meeting called Best Bits, which took place on the weekend prior to the IGF. And this was a meeting of 50 civil society groups and experts who came together. One of the things that we were very careful to ensure was that it was a geographically diverse group, and indeed we had participants from 20 countries, from Armenia to Venezuela. And indeed there was a very high level of balance between the global north and south. And this lends greater legitimacy to the outputs of the meeting. And we had 2 outputs. The one that is relevant to the discussion at the moment is a resolution relating to internet rights and principles. And in general, it does align with what Wolfgang put forward, that there is an appropriate role for the IGF in developing a compendium of internet statements of principles. And the exact wording of the declaration that we made at the meeting is as follows. We call on the IGF to develop an IGF-level multi-stakeholder statement of Internet governance, drawing on existing statements of rights and principles developed by various stakeholders for presentation to the 2013 meeting of the IGF in Indonesia. Now, while the timescale is debatable, we did have a consensus on that. So, whilst I acknowledge the concern that we should let 100 flowers bloom and 100 schools of thought contend, the problem is that if everyone can come up with their own statement of principles, then there's no comparability, there's no accountability, there's no common standard, and certainly there's no legitimacy of coming up with your own statement of principles if you want other people to follow it. The only way in which we can have legitimacy and comparability is if we collaborate as a multi-stakeholder group towards consensus on certain principles that are not in dispute by anyone. So that's something that we would like to see the IGF work towards, to prove its utility as the most appropriate, indeed the only global body with a remit over the entire internet governance arena, not just over naming and numbering, not just over telecommunications networks, but the whole of internet governance. So certainly the IGF is the most appropriate body to undertake such an exercise. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this intervention. Please.
Thank you very much. My name is Franklin Neto. I am from the Brazilian government. And as I said, my words will not be only referred to the statements of principle. I will take the opportunity in the name of the efficiency here of the process to also comment on other issues, but I will start by that. We also think that certainly the IGF would have a very important role on crafting these statements of principle. I would not see any better place where you could gather the positions and all the richness that all the stakeholders can bring to the process than the IGF. It was mentioned that to contribute to this process we could feed also from national experiences, and it was mentioned the Marco Civil of the Internet in Brazil, the civil framework of the Internet. Unfortunately, we could not yet approve Marco Civil of the Internet in the Congress. As I have been stating here in the opportunities that I had to talk about the Marco Civil, it was an initiative of the executive branch of power, listening to all the sectors of the society and attending to the demands of the sectors and trying to put between that classic needs to balance security and privacy, trying to start by the guaranteeing privacy and the rights of the citizen. But like I said, the Marco Civil is in Congress now, and as in all democratic systems, the executive branch of power does not have control over Congress. Then we expect that it can be voted as soon as possible and approved. Commenting on some aspects that were also mentioned before, we are very happy to hear, Bertrand, that after this meeting here in Baku, the enhanced cooperation concept again is not a taboo. Is the process in some recent years that has gained this taboo fashion. Then we would like to commend the ISOC and the other organizers for having had this pre-event before the IGF meeting, where many stakeholders could bring their opinions about enhanced cooperation. The Brazilian position on these issues is very clear. I mean, that this is a very important outcome of the WISIS process, of the Tunis agenda, and it was very unfortunate if the process ended as it ended last May in Geneva, where we almost had the opportunity to really have a body to discuss, a platform to discuss the concept and to hear the stakeholders about how we could operationalize this concept. And I think events like this help clarify the positions and show that when we talk about enhanced cooperation, we're talking about a multi-stakeholder process. We're talking about a process that wants to hear from the contributions of all the interested parties to really allow the whole process to result in public policies. This is the outcome of the process. Enhanced cooperation is something that was not very well defined in the Tunis agenda, but the outcome is very clear. The outcome of the process to have public policy goals and objectives. And I think since we have such a clear objective, we should continue to talk and to discuss to see how we can get there. One important point that was mentioned is that the IGF would greatly benefit if it could feed from the regional IGFs, if we could have some articulate process, a systemic process through which the IGF process could feed and bring their results to the IGF in the benefit of all the stakeholders. And one comment, I mean, this was my first IGF, the first time I participated in this forum. It was a wonderful opportunity to do networking and to, especially as a government official, to be in a more open space where we can learn and where we can listen to the opinions of the other stakeholders. But we consider that one of the needs of the process is that it should resonate more in the other bodies. And this comes to the, like it was said before, to the results of that, to the findings of that working group on improving the IGF. We really do think that we should find ways whereby the results of the IGF could be systematized, it could be organized, and could be in this more systemic way resonate in the other fora, be it in the governmental realm, in the private sector realm, or in the civil society realm. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before I take the last intervention, I'm asking the organizers whether we're a little bit behind schedule.
I think that's fine. So please, Ayesha Hassan, if you'd like to start with your question. It's a valuable discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, Constance, Aisha Hassan on behalf of the International Chamber of Commerce and its BASIS initiative. It is a comment. First of all, I wanted to say that Global Business welcomes this dialogue about principles, and it is an example of how the IGF continues to promote the development of the multi-stakeholder model. It is also an example of how each year the IGF continues to build on the discussions from the previous years. The principles have been discussed in workshops and other events, but it's now part of the main session on taking stock in the way forward. And this is an important evolution. When we listen to the range of internet or multi-stakeholder principles that are emerging in various forums and processes and countries and from stakeholder groups, I think that there's room for further exploration of where there may be generally supported multi-stakeholder principles in the context of internet governance that would get general support. So I just wanted to express on our behalf that this is a dialogue that we welcome, and we look forward to furthering it in the preparatory process for the IGF next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aisha, for that. If there is no other intervention, I think I'm going to give the floor to Nermine, who will move the discussion forward towards perhaps impact and action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Actually, my part will raise the question on how the so-mentioned principles could be compiled and how the IGF as a platform could be used for that. Indeed, the Internet governance has witnessed several important milestones since its initiation during the WSIS, starting by defining the term itself, followed by identifying the issues pertaining to Internet governance, and following agreeing on formation of the Internet Governance Forum that we are having right now. Today, we have a group of principles proposed by different stakeholders to act as a code of conduct on the usage of Internet. Some view this as sort of regulation to the Internet itself. In order to pave the way for our discussion and how to relate those principles to our forum, I think it is always better to remind ourselves with some key issues describing the Internet from its beginning. I believe it should be maintained as well. First, Internet was born as non-regulated media that served the globe. As such, when we try to address issues related to its governing principles or code of conduct, then it is always good to note that what started global should remain global. Internet has never been regulated as well. It was rather a self-regulated platform where the basic consensus within was sharing, collaborating, exchanging knowledge among all involved stakeholders. Third, Internet is based on multi-stakeholder principle, where all relevant stakeholders are to work together, each in his respective role. Therefore, no one entity could lead on its own. That is why the flexibility and non-binding nature of the Internet Governance Forum allows it to freely incubate and exchange ideas around the governing principles in a way that could help materializing them in the future. This week we had two interesting workshops. One tackled the issue of the output of Internet Governance Forum, and the other one poses the question of multi-stakeholderism, whether or not it has flow within or it is the good model that we can adopt forever and ongoing. If there are someone from those two workshops, number 145 and 85 and 145, if please anyone, Tsumi, yes, please, on the output of the Internet Governance Forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Nalin, and good morning, everyone. I'm the moderator of the session number 85. That's called "But This IGF," or the future of the IGF. We started the brief summary of the chair of the CSTD working group on the improvement of IGF, Peter Major, who's the chair of this session as well, that he made a brief summary of the final report for the audience that is now tabled on the General Assembly of the United Nations, can be voted anytime by now. The report, which I was also the member of for about 18 months exercise, comprised of 5 parts. First, the shaping of the outcome of IGF meetings. The second one is working modality that includes the overall preparatory process as well as working methods of the MAG or MAG, and strengthening the secretariat. No one really argued against these areas in a way. Let me go back, sorry. And then the second part is, the third part is the funding of the IGF. That's the core issue, and we had great debate and difficulty to reach the consensus of the report. Peter summarized that the encourage increased voluntary financial contribution was the first point we agreed. The second one is this is not quite good. Enhance the accountability and transparency. And the fourth one is a broadening participation and capacity building. And the fifth one is linking IGF to the other internet governance-related entities. And Peter left with one suggestion or proposal that MAG will create working group within MAG to implement these recommendations. Then we had 4 speakers of the member of the working group, Wolfgang Kreinvector, Melvi Kutama from the Finland government, Marcus Kumar from ISOC, and Pamina Jitshin from IT for Change India. They also shared the take-ups from the working group exercise, and most stressed, of course, the importance of the multi-stakeholder dimension, but which was interesting in the CSTD working group because CSTD is a UN framework or UN body. We had to work within that framework. Unlike the IGF, which is anchored to the UN system but not within the UN system, we had several constraints in the beginning. However, we somehow, with a heated debate and stuff, we got a close sort of working modality of the multi-stakeholder to the IGF. As for the main question of Quo-Vadis, or the future of the IGF, all agreed that IGF is somewhat in the competitive environment now after 7 years, but preserved the multi-stakeholder nature, and that's the way to go. But also there was some expression of disappointment that IGF didn't really work to the expectation, and that's why we may need to improve. Especially there were not a balanced participation from the developing countries or between those developed and developing. Now, there were a general agreement with the report about the outcomes that we need more concrete outcome for going step forward, which sounds not too problematic this time, but it was in the beginning of the IGF, one panelist pointed out. What was seemingly okay to discuss now was a kind of taboo 7 years ago, something like the so-called enhanced cooperation or even the CIRs. About creating the working group, there were two proposals. One is to implement the recommendations. Another proposal was made for the working group for the enhanced cooperation, but there was no real concrete consensus about that, as we all know. For the funding, we had also a good debate with the floor. One school of thought is RB, other is EB. RB is within the regular budget of the UN system. From the floor as well, the one representative who is the UN officials responsible for the Arab IGF suggested there could be some path to bring this into the UN system and make it within the regular budget. Others, especially from the industry or private sector, pointed out the danger of capture, that if it's within the governmental system, that it might be captured somehow by the governments. From the other side, that if we are to continue the voluntary funding system and rely on the industry, then there might be another captured by the big corporations. Again, there was no real consensus, but we all see that there's a need to increase the fund. That was, I think, the consensus. So I think I will stop here. There are many things left that we couldn't really discuss within the time allocated, and I invite any other members of the group or in the workshop if you have other complementary opinions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Itsumi. Do we have someone from workshop one? Okay, you have the floor, sir.
Hi, thank you. My name is Carlos Afonso from Getúlio Vargas Foundation, Brazil. So I'm reporting back from workshop 145, Threats to Multi-Stakeholderism. What are the main problems and how can we solve them? So the interest of time, as we're running a little bit late, will be very, very short, since the report back from the other workshop, I think, make these comments very, very, I would say, complementary and in addition to what Izumi has already mentioned. So the workshop, Threats to Multi-Stakeholderism, what are the main problems and how can we solve them? Proposed a debate on multi-stakeholder government as a concept and then addressed how it is working in practice, with focus on some experiences and internal as well as external threats to its fulfillment. The panelists have addressed how multi-stakeholder governance is paramount for the fostering of many principles of Internet governance, like representation, participation, accountability, responsibility, transparency, and efficiency. And the debate focused on how multi-stakeholder can prevail in a scenario in which currently we have increasing threats to its fulfillment, either internally and externally. Internally, there was some language in the discussion on the lack of support to the very organization of the annual IGF events, Improving and enabling the IGF Secretariat may be one of those threats that end up being highlighted during the discussion. Externally, other fora have been formed and engaged in the discussion of Internet governance in a no-multi-stakeholder fashion, falling short in the task to include all stakeholders in a equal manner to the discussion. In this regard, it's important to mention that both governmental representatives and the panel from Brazil and United States agreed with the idea of advancing the creation of a multi-stakeholder working group on enhancing the cooperation. So in the end, if we want to protect multi-stakeholder governance, it was quite clear by the end of the discussions that we need to scrutinize exactly what it is that we are protecting. It is time to reconsider and revive the concept and practice of multi-stakeholder governance. That was the goal of the workshop, and the organizers would like to thank the organization of the IGF and hope the conversation will continue to foster the understanding and the relevance of a multi-stakeholder internet governance. And I would like to invite the panelists of this workshop that happen to be around the room to, if they want to make additional comments on this very short description, what we discussed yesterday. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Carlos. Since we are still in the principal part, and before I open the floor for statements or opinions, there was one roundtable in the morning today about human rights, and I assume human rights is one of the basic principles that are being discussed. I see Johan among the participants, and I would like to call upon him to give us some brief on the roundtable.
So thank you very much. My name is Johan Hallenborg. I work with the Foreign Affairs Ministry in Sweden. And I'm reporting back from a roundtable meeting we had this morning on human rights. This was the first roundtable on human rights in the IGF. And the purpose was to wrap up the main human rights issues that have been discussed during the IGF this year, and also give some proposals for the future. This was done through multi-stakeholder discussions this morning. The event was arranged by APC with some minor assistance from my government. We have 2 observations and we have 7 proposals. Freedom of expression and threats to the internet users was a common thread in a great number of workshops throughout the IGF. This reflects the fact that freedom of expression online is increasingly under threat in many countries in the world, and this has been evident during the IGF. The resolution in the Human Rights Council on enjoyment of human rights online has proven to be a very useful foundation when integrating a human rights perspective in the IGF discussions. The second observation is starting with a quote from Vint Cerf, that human rights are in the DNA of the internet. So therefore, importance of the access to the enjoyment of human rights online is important. And this is access not only to the infrastructure, but more importantly, access to the content on the internet. There have been a lot of workshops this year on blocking, etc. So this perspective has been a main theme in the human rights discussions of the IGF. The role of the business sector in keeping the networks open and accessible has also this year been highlighted. We have a few proposals for the coming work of the IGF. We believe that there is a need to ensure freedom of expression also during the IGF, and there are several aspects that need to be taken into account, including in the organizational arrangements of the IGF itself. Secondly, we appreciate a lot that many local activists participated in this year's IGF. However, we believe that IGF proactively could create a platform for local human rights activists, so this is a suggestion. Another proposal mentioned was perhaps that the IGF could institute an award for particularly courageous human rights activists and defenders online. The third proposal is to exchange best practices on how human rights are implemented online in various countries to close the gap between the big human rights principles that runs internationally and national laws and national implementation. The fourth proposal is to address the responsibility of intermediaries from a human rights perspective more effectively in the IGF. The recent report by Special Rapporteur Frank LaRue could be an important source of inspiration in this context. Fifthly, we believe that more workshops are needed on the relationship between the technical community and the human rights community. So we need more discussions on how the technical solutions to the internet affect enjoyment of human rights. This is something that have been emerging this year, but we need to see this coming more forcefully in the coming IGFs. Sixth proposal. We need to explore how the IGF discussions can feed into the human rights fora. There is no link currently between the discussions here and the human rights forums that exist. This is not only the UN, but also in other places. A proposal could be to next year have feeder workshops on this issue. And the seventh proposal was that the roundtable on human rights was a useful venue, and that such a roundtable should be held also in the coming IGFs. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and I would like to open the floor now for discussion. I would like to remind you as well that this is your part where we can have your input so that we can articulate the messages that we're going to have out of the discussions during the annual meeting, this meeting of the Internet Governance Forum. The floor is open. Anyone? In order to trigger the discussion, as Parminder has done earlier, maybe I would like to recall what we have discussed so far. We have seen, for example, Wolfgang giving a notion that the MAG could have a role in articulating messages or combining the principles on internet governance that are being discussed elsewhere. And we have Alessandro saying that the MAG is not like the platform to do this kind of thing. So what do you think the Internet Governance Forum could do for compilation of Internet governance principles, and whether or not do you agree that these principles could be combined on a global level?
Nermin?
Peter, you'd like to say something?
Thank you. Getting back to Wolfgang's proposal, I seem to have heard that he was just proposing a compilation and not an evaluation, not a proposal on its own. That is, he doesn't really want to come up with something which is a kind of definitive legal text. So in case the MAG is interested, a working group in the MAG is interested to do this work, a compilation and find the commonalities within the different principles, I can see no harm in that. If I have the mic, let me reflect on the working group on the improvement of the on the IGF as well. I would like to emphasize one point about this working group, and this is that it was a multi-stakeholder working group. Those of you who have been attending meetings in the UN in an intergovernmental environment would probably appreciate the fact that there was one working group which was a real multi-stakeholder, where all the participants were given the floor on equal footing, and all the ideas, all the proposals were considered seriously and were taken in equality. So I think that was the one of the main results of this working group, and this is kind of just showing an example for the future in case a similar working group is being set up for the enhanced cooperation. Thank you.
So we have Constance, then Anne, then Bertrand.
Thank you very much. And I'll be very brief. We've talked about principles and what is the way forward working with these principles. I very much liked Anne Carsblanc's terminology, compendium, instead of compilation. I think in terms of finding common ground, that would probably be the adequate terminology. In any case, and I think this echoes a comment from civil society this morning, this exercise, and this is critical, needs to be done in a multi-stakeholder environment, perhaps the MAG, perhaps another group, but in any case, this should not be purely, solely intergovernmental. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps everybody said what they had to say in the first part of the session. I'm a bit disappointed to see that nobody's taking the floor, but I would just like to say that if the IGF does not offer a platform for all stakeholders to at least inform everybody about these sets of principles, which organization will do it? The second point is that human rights are very important, but there are other aspects also, other perspectives, including the economic perspective, which leads also to economic growth, but also to social welfare, and increasingly we hope to well-being. So if eventually an initiative is taken to produce a compendium, that means gather all these sets of principles, the OECD will be happy to participate. Thank you.
Bertrand?
Thank you, Narmin. I would like to remind us all that the last IGF in Nairobi had a session on taking stock and the way forward that I had the privilege to co-moderate with Janet. And this issue of the proliferation of principles had already emerged, and there were significant discussions during the IGF in Nairobi regarding how to handle this proliferation of principles. There was a very strong agreement at the time that such putting the different principles together or close to one another and triggering a discussion among the different actors on what can be done with it was a general agreement. The question we're addressing today is how to do it best, because we didn't define a procedure last year, and therefore things have continued to evolve. The discussions about principles have grown, positively, I think, but we don't have a mechanism. And what is at stake here is how to move forward in a cautious but useful manner. The term compendium seemed to represent at least the first step, and there are various actors who may diverge on the ultimate goal of integration or development of another type of document. However, I see a certain number of milestones and natural time frames that could help structure the discussion. In February, there's the WSIS Plus 10 session organized by UNESCO, and immediately afterwards will be the consultations and the MAG meeting. The compilation of principles that we're talking about, as was mentioned before by Anne, I think, has already in part been done. I know that the Civil Society and the Internet Governance Caucus has already identified a certain number. It doesn't take very long for one person that could be seconded by whatever actor may want to do so, to prepare for February in a very informal manner such a compilation. Let's not make it, I would say, an exercise excessively complex. It may not be complete by February, and it may even be an ongoing compendium, because there will be new principles. But if by February we have a reasonable set of declarations, sets of principles, and if the WSIS Plus 10 session at UNESCO allows for one session to discuss those principles, co-organized maybe by the different institutions, then the MAG will be in an excellent position to decide how it wants to move forward afterwards. So that is just a suggestion, and I wonder whether it is not getting in the pragmatic zone instead of trying to solve the problem in a philosophical way.
Thank you, Bertrand. I think I see Parminder. Yes, you have the floor.
Thank you, Nerman, for giving me this mic for the third time, but I wanted to give a suggestion for the process, because I do think that this space should be doing something about the principles. My problem was specific, and I'll come to the problem about MAG working group, but the positive suggestion first. I think we should have a roundtable on internet principles in the next IGF. I, on the behalf of the Dynamic Coalition on Internet Rights and Principle, offer to help organize that roundtable. It is even possible that when we give out a call or early we say that we want to focus the next IGF in some kind of principles building environment, and that goes out early when we are describing the nature of the next IGF, probably its name, the call goes out and focus around a roundtable and encourage more workshops around this thing, and then create an environment in which this talk becomes very mature. And that's a specific proposal for the process to go ahead. I should again insist on the earlier comment which Dr. May did mention something about, that the problem is that a working group of a MAG was a specific proposal, and a repeat was put to the working group on IGF. It is a part of at least 3 or 4 specific proposals. It was not accepted. It was rejected under the chairmanship of Dr. May, and I think we should have to specifically find a reason why that recommendation would be gone beyond. I think the process is, as I say, which is obviously also more bottom-up. Thank you for giving attention. Thank you.
Thanks, Parminder. Teresa, you have the floor.
I just wanted to say that I think this has been an incredibly useful dialogue. It also builds on last year's dialogue that Bertrand had alluded to and highlighted. I think we have a very good opportunity leading into the open consultations in February, the dialogues at the WSIS Plus 10, as well as the upcoming MAG meeting. And as a MAG member, I certainly look forward to having this dialogue and also within the MAG on how to move this process forward in a very good way. We've reached a good cusp of discussion, and it's time to reach that next phase now. Thank you.
Thanks, Teresa. I think I would agree with you. We have been discussing for 7 years now about Internet Governance Forum during the annual meetings, as well as around annual meetings in other, like side events or round tables or whatever regarding Internet governance at large. And I think this is a maturity point in time that we can move forward and take our next steps. With this, I would like to pass the floor to our moderator, Peter, to start the third part of our session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nermin. Thank you, Anne, for the excellent second part. The takeaway from this second part to me is that there were some proposals to create some new tasks for the multi-stakeholder advisory group, but we shall come back to that at the end of the session. Now, it's the third part, what is the way forward, and the facilitators will be Avri Doria and Windsurf. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, welcome to the way forward. Now, one of the things that has come up in the discussion so far is the fact that the IGF evolves. It has been continuously evolving since the beginning, and in fact, if one were to look back at some of the discussions we had at Athens, one would not recognize the IGF we have today, and it could not have been imagined at the IGF in Athens that we would be having some of the discussions we have today. So when we're looking at the way forward, there really are 2 separate dimensions to that discussion. The discussion in terms of the IGF itself, and the discussion in terms of the substance of the IGF, what we're talking about, what we will be talking about. In terms of the IGF itself, when we look at the CSTD and its recommendations, and we really must look at them and we must look at implementing them, it's important to realize that the CSTD, when it was thinking about its recommendations, was talking about an IGF that was already 2 years old. And so it made recommendations very much in a context of that. When looking at the General Assembly and its decision on those and its perhaps modification of those, it's important to remember that it is not a multi-stakeholder body. I think that it is important that we, as moving forward, take the CSTD recommendations into account, but I think it's also important that we do not treat them as the end-all and be-all of what we may do. They give us mandates, they give us recommendations for moving forward. They do not give us prohibitions about what we can or cannot do. So I think it's very important that when the MAG begin its consultations and begin talking about how to take the issues before it and move forward, it really does look at the full range of possibilities that have been recommended in a bottom-up manner at this IGF and between. I think, for example, the notion that constantly comes up of how do we continue working between IGFs so that the MAG isn't just a program committee talking about what we will talk about next year, that we have dynamic coalitions that are truly dynamic and continue to work through the year on coming up with messages and recommendations. In terms of substantive issues, we've moved beyond the days when we could not talk about critical internet resources, and we do it all the time. We've moved beyond the days of not being able to talk about human rights, and we had a meeting where human rights was really one of the prominent substantive issues, especially dealing with freedoms and security. I foresee that the way forward includes further development of these themes, of that discussion, and that certainly came up in the discussions we've had so far. Other things that have been recommended in terms of way forward is finding ways of working continuously to discuss these things as we go on. It is important, finally, before I pass it on, to look at some of the statements that were made at this IGF in defense of freedoms, in defense of the right, the freedom to speech, a freedom of speech, and the freedom after speech. And it is a very important role that the IGF fulfills in those freedoms that we must move forward with. So I'll now turn it over to Vint in terms of his views on that. And here, yeah.
Thank you very much, Avri. Good morning, everyone. A random thought, possibly an unworthy one, has occurred to me just in the last moment. And I'm thinking, Peter, I hope that this won't be mistaken, but I think the MAG should belong to the IGF and not to the CSTD. Despite the structural origins of this institution, it feels like we should be in charge of what we're about, as opposed to someone telling us what to do. I like very much Avri's observation that having been mandated to do X, that should not mean that we're mandated not to do not X. So, Peter, I hope that I haven't offended anyone, but it just occurs to me that if we're going to do anything, then we had better be in charge of what we are about. Let me begin by making some observations. First of all, with regard to this 7th IGF, the UN DESA staff and the IGF Secretariat, with the assistance of the Azerbaijani hosts, have accomplished a lot with very little resource. I conclude that we must find a way forward to increase the reliability of the resources available for future IGF meetings. I want to commit myself publicly to finding ways to increase private and public sector engagement and support for the IGF. That's an action item. Second, the IGF meetings are rich in content and diversity. They're vigorous in thought-provoking debate. This one was no different, but we're not leveraging the accumulated wisdom of the observations of participants as well as we should. A project to catalog, archive, and curate the cumulative documents, including the transcripts of all the IGFs, is called for. I am committed to working with like-minded participants to achieve a sustainable archive and data mining capability to inform future IGFs and to assess historical trends. There's already evidence of some of this kind of work being done by some of the people participating in the IGF. The question is providing a framework and adequate platforms to accomplish that goal. Third, it seems clear that more can and should be done to draw attention to the problems that are surfaced at the IGF in discussions here and in between IGF meetings. This theme has come up more than once. We meet once a year in this global forum, and I think work needs to happen in between. So to this end, we should consider tasking and staffing the MAG or a MAG-like working party to analyze the issues that have been raised and to assess whether progress is being made. This work could include specific observations derived from the IGF deliberations and speculative suggestions inappropriate for appropriate fora. So the question is, are the issues that have arisen deserve attention by other bodies besides our own, and which ones might they be? The working group might then produce not only observations about where those issues could be addressed, but could at the beginning of the next IGF report on progress that has been made. I am concerned that we don't look at our own progress and assess how well we're achieving our objectives. Fourth observation, it seems important to test the idea of dynamic coalition efforts that continue between the annual IGF meetings. So perhaps some of the dynamic coalitions formed during this IGF can attempt to engage during 2013 in remote or even face-to-face interaction, making use of online tools to further their work. Fifth observation, this IGF, as have its predecessors, has reaffirmed the vital utility of multi-stakeholder exchanges that benefit from candor without forced attempt to reach consensus. The IGF process should draw upon a broader range of participants from all stakeholder sectors, especially from Latin and Central America, Africa, and Asia-Pac. Incentives and facilitating steps are needed to achieve this objective. Sixth, the IGF should institute a self-evaluation process for improvement, and I think the work of the CSTD working group is an example of that. Last observation is just a footnote, but it occurs to me that there is great power in loose coupling and informality. And so one thing we should be very careful about is adopting practices and principles that are overly restrictive and somehow inhibit our ability to explore possibilities. So I'll stop there, Avri, and I think we should now find out what other people have to say about the way forward.
Okay, thank you. So now the program has two sections in it before we come to a close. And in the first section, basically going to invite the facilitators from the previous two sections. They've done good evaluations of taking stock, and now basically inviting them to sort of give us their notion of what is their message for the way forward, how within the specific realms that they've been discussing, that they've been working on, do they recommend that we move forward. Then we will open the floor to the rest of you to sort of give us your messages in terms of how we move forward. And I'll really hope that people will sort of phrase these in messages for how to move forward, less evaluative on what we've done, but how they think that this can progress, how we can take the IGF and move it towards meeting more and more goals that we all have. So first, I guess I'd like to ask Bertrand if you can give us the messages for moving forward that you would like to give.
Thank you very much, Avery. It's always difficult to synthesize, but I would like to do it around two legs, as was suggested. One around the substance and themes that I feel have emerged that can help move forward, and the second thing about the IGF itself. I have three quick themes. One that we have already addressed, but I think has emerged as an extremely important one, is this discussion about principles. And the way forward that is emerging, I think, picking from the different elements that have been mentioned this morning, is to, in any case, include almost already in the program of the IGF in Indonesia a session dedicated to this issue. And that in any case, the WSIS Plus 10 meeting, at least in UNESCO, is another opportunity to explore this and discuss this on the occasion of the MAG. And that ideally, if goodwill is being proposed, maybe in this very session, to help do this compendium for the February meeting, this would be a wonderful way forward and operational. The second thing is, as we said, the discussion about enhanced cooperation has progressed. It is slow, and the thing that has been discussed is the distinction between enhanced cooperation and enhanced cooperations in the plural. One of the major roles, in my view, of the IGF is to help catalyze issue-based stakeholder networks that can work between the IGF and its next meeting. The whole debate about whether the IGF should have working groups or not becomes moot if the way people organize their discussions in between provides them with a very easy way to report at the next IGF, and they organize their whole balance. And the IGF participants will evaluate whether these initiatives are sufficiently multi-stakeholder, sufficiently efficient, etc. But moving towards enhanced cooperations in the plural is important in my view, and I hope that the working group, if there is a working group that is set up for the CSTD, will address this issue, and that this working group, more importantly, will be multi-stakeholder. Finally, I would like to highlight something that, as many of you know, is dear to my heart, but I was pleased to see the confirmation of the importance of the jurisdictional dimensions of issues that we're facing. And one expression that emerged in one of the workshops that I participated in or attended in is the notion of the danger of a jurisdictional arms race, whereby all actors and all governments in particular, very legitimately to exercise their sovereignty, develop principles, norms and rules that may be not compatible and may introduce conflict of jurisdiction. The IGF is a remarkable place, as has been demonstrated this week, to help the different actors understand where the others are going, and to make sure that instead of having to harmonize ex post very diverse patchworks of legislations, the different governments, companies and civil society actors have the opportunity to discuss in advance. These were three substantive themes. I have likewise a few comments on the IGF itself. In the second or third iteration of the IGF, I used the expression that the IGF was just like a ship slowly getting out of the harbor and trying to avoid two big rocks. One was excessive formality and the other one was excessive informality. The IGF has gone out of the harbor somehow after 7 years, and its new challenge in terms of path to chart is not formality or informality, it's institutionalization or not. Not too much institutionalization turning it into an organization is not what is needed. On the other hand, the current situation of probably insufficient support and structure is harming the potential to move in the right balance. And I would like to make just a few points in that regard. The first thing is that the attempt to draft a ministerial declaration in the pre-event and the difficulty of this exercise should be a reminder of how hard it is to even consider drafting things in a large format. Therefore, I would suggest that for the next IGF at least, the reporting format to facilitate messages would be based on having individual rapporteurs per workshop, different from the organizers, that would be explicitly tasked with producing half-page bullet points to be issued immediately at the end of the IGF, so that there is a compilation of very short messages for each workshop. The second thing is the MAG will have and should have a stronger role in shaping the agenda. And in particular, instead of making a call for workshop proposals that can come later, it should start with a call for themes and issues, and use its first meeting or further online discussion to aggregate the themes and clusterize them so that there can be calls for feeder workshops and calls for workshops after a skeleton of agenda is being designed. The proliferation of workshops is remarkable, but there clearly still are too many, and this is a problem we've struggled with. It is the duty and the responsibility of the MAG to find a way and address this issue, and the solutions are available. Finally, on the structure of the IGF itself, it is a testimony to both the dynamic of the multi-stakeholder principle and the resilience of the very small secretariat, particularly Shanghai, that the IGF is still functioning with this limited amount of resources. It is remarkable, but it is not sustainable. And we are in this famous catch-22 situation whereby the lack of funding does not allow for the recruitment of an executive secretary, and as long as there is no visibility on the recruitment, the funding doesn't come. We have an urgency for the Indonesia meeting, and I wonder whether some initiatives of secondment, not to supersede Shanghai, was doing a very good job, but some initiative of secondment to deal with some elements of the preparatory process to Indonesia could not be done. And if actors are willing to do so, it would be wonderful. The other problem we have is the MAG has functioned without a chair. It used to be the special advisor of the Secretary General of the United Nations. For various reasons, the current situation is we have functioned, and the MAG has functioned without a specific chair. I am raising the question of whether there is any way forward that would allow, with an appropriate procedure, and I can imagine it is difficult, that would allow the MAG itself to designate its own chair, and whether this would be useful for the process. And my final point is related to the overall WSIS plus 10 procedure. We do not know what the format of the event in 2015 is going to be. But I just want to highlight 2 points. It is extremely important to take stock of all the progress that has been made during those 7 years, and to make sure that whatever happens in 2015 is a real progress from the format we had in 2005. Going back to the type of structure and procedures of preparation that we had would not be acceptable. And I just want to remind all of us that we already have 3 meetings at least for 2015. There will be an IGF, there will be a CSTD meeting, and there will be a WSIS forum. Do we really need an additional meeting, or is there a way to combine them and to make sure that the celebration of the 10th anniversary of the WSIS Declaration of Tunis is the recognition that we have achieved real progress in establishing multi-stakeholder processes? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bertrand. Next, Kusai, would you have any messages on ways forward, please?
Thank you, Avery. On the themes issue, I would like to see the future IGF discussing the internet as a transformation, a social and economical transformation tool to the public and to its users. The internet is user-centric, and the users' creativity and innovation that contributed most to the growth of the internet that we are witnessing today. This growth has reflected into opportunities and jobs. It created digital and knowledge economies, and these are all due to user creativity and innovation. So we have witnessed classical boundaries that has been crossed. We have witnessed attempts to create boundaries and it failed. So we have realized that the innovation and the creativity of users doesn't have borders. So rather than limiting or creating limits on that, we better create an environment that allows it to expand further. So I would like to see future IGF to discuss more internet as a tool of economical and social change. That's on the themes issue. On the IGF itself, I would like to see the global IGF more engaged with regional and national IGFs. I think many regional IGFs can contribute or feed themes and issues into the global IGF. So I would like to have a better engagement or a better process of engagement between the global IGFs and the regional IGFs. That would be an issue to see how we can reflect it on the global IGF. Thank you.
Thank you, Kusai. Anne, would you like to go next and give us your messages for the way forward? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Avery. Well, on the themes, I support what Kusai just said about the economic and social aspects, which are all important, and the human rights for the internet. But I'm particularly sensitive to what Avery, Doria and Vincent delivered as messages. And I think that the IGF probably needs to better document and understand where it started from and in which direction it wants or it can go, both in terms of the forum itself and its content. This can only benefit each and all around the world. Thank you.
Thank you. And Amin, if you have any messages you'd like to please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Avery. Actually, I would like to start my comment on the regional and national levels. I think one of the major impact that the IGF has done through the previous 7 years was the creation of regional and national IGFs. And I assume that the flow in from the output of those regional workshops or meetings enriched the substance on the Internet Governance Forum itself on the global level. I would see a merit in tasking the regional IGFs that is now prevailing on the ground to come up with their own principles that suits their own culture and beliefs. And then we can adopt together the IGF as the platform for discussing those regional principles and come up with some sort of like declaration or a global output for the principles that could govern the Internet Governance Forum and feed in the Millennium Development Goals maybe in 2015, and hence we link what is going on the ground here in the Governance Forum and the Millennium Development Goals in a couple of years. As well, I would see a merit in examining the possibility of having an intersessional meeting in between the annual IGF. This could be even happen remotely, because I think the development through the year is very much rich, and when we meet together annually in 4 or 5 days, the extensive information that we try to gather in 4 or 5 days is not enough, and maybe an intersessional meeting could be of relevance in that regard. The funding of the Secretariat, I would continue supporting that. There is definitely a huge need as well to support the Secretariat, despite the fact that they are doing a great job, but we need to have it sustainable. We need to have some empowerment, at least to be able to respond in a better way to our needs, like, for example, having 6 languages website or intersessional meetings or whatever. I think the funding of the Secretariat, appointment of the executive coordinator and the advisor to the UN Secretary General is key for the sustainability of the Internet Governance Forum. Finally, and here it is just a food for thought that I would like to pose for our maybe informal discussions later on. Why don't we think together of creating like a think tank group where we can discuss together and foster the collaboration on Internet governance policy, public policy issues. The Internet Governance Forum has been an evidence for having an enhanced cooperation in the process, and I think such a group on a think tank level or high-level policy dialogue could even further the efforts that have been done on enhanced cooperation ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Nermeen. At this point, we'll be opening to the floor to hopefully those of you that have messages on the way forward, and I'll turn over the microphone to Vint to facilitate that particular section.
Microphones are open and waiting. I see Professor Pisanti. We're not hearing you. Still nothing. All right, that sounds like it works.
It was a simple button. My name is Alejandro Pisanti. I would like to briefly make a comment on Bertrand de la Chapelle's intervention. One specific point. I read, and I may have understood wrongly, so ready to be corrected. Some of what you said seems to lead to declarations, to summaries, or to maybe no such thing? Okay. But I would warn personally against things that lead to that, because it will put us into the funnel. It would take the IGF into the funnel of agreed text, and we know that's a no-go. Thank you.
All right, I have this gentleman over at the other microphone now.
I neglected to introduce myself before. I'm Jeremy Malcolm from Consumers International, and in the earlier session this morning, we spoke about how the IGF can be a useful place for the restatement of principles of human rights. We also need to be sure that it's a place where we can freely exercise our human rights, and in particular the human right to freedom of expression. And in many of the workshops, we found that oral discussions were very freely allowed, and that there were very robust discussions. For example, there was an OSCE workshop on freedom of the press in which there was open discussion of that issue both in Azerbaijan and elsewhere. But there were some stumbling blocks this year with regard to the distribution of written materials. And it could perhaps be said that the UN Secretariat had been a little bit overzealous in the enforcement of UN protocols about the distribution of written materials. At first, there were these anti-censorship postcards that an Indonesian NGO tried to distribute and was prevented from distributing. And then later there were reports from civil society in Azerbaijan that were prevented from being distributed. The Secretariat, to its credit, did later back down in regard to the postcards and admitted that a mistake had been made in not allowing those to be distributed. But the civil society report from Azerbaijan is still not allowed to be distributed here, and one has to question whether there is any merit in that, given that we are freely able to discuss things in workshops. Why can't we freely distribute reports that may have controversial content? The rationale is that these reports identify particular countries and practices of those countries. But then again, there have been reports such as the Global Information Society Watch that also identify practices of specific countries that have been freely allowed to be distributed at the IGF for many years. So what I think needs to be done is to establish some written principles which will set out in clarity and detail what sort of publications can be distributed at the IGF and which ones cannot. And we should have some input into the formulation of those principles, because we should always remember that the IGF is not a UN body as such. It's a meeting convened by the UN Secretary-General, and we have some flexibility in terms of the structure of this meeting and the procedures that apply. So I would call on the Secretariat and the MAG to collaborate on the development of a draft statement which can be opened up for discussion by the IGF community as to how we can exercise our freedom of expression at the IGF, not only orally but also in terms of the written materials that we exchange. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Much to the point. Gentleman over on my left. Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Chairman.
Could you please to pass me the materials that, as you stated, was forbidden to distribute in Azerbaijan? And if it's possible, could you say which sources you use it to state that it was forbidden in Azerbaijan, distribution of this material? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman to my left.
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
my name is Kyle Schulman. I'm an engaged member of the internet community. I have a question I'd like to pose, and that is, how do we concretely build in input from local and regional processes to feed internet governance discussions and ensure participation from all these in all these critical discussions? Because it's vital that everyone participate in these discussions on principles, for example.
So let me just intervene and suggest that we might, in fact, make use of the kinds of computer-based tools that seem to help us to do this in other contexts so that we can accumulate contributions coming from virtually anywhere. They plainly need to be organized, and so that's going to take some work. But at least we can obtain inputs, I hope, in a timely way, in the same way that we had inputs online during the course of the working group meetings. Let me take the next jump. I'm sorry, who is that at the other? Yes, please.
I'm a lady.
So you
Carolina
are,
Guerre from LAC TLD.
I couldn't tell from all of the headset on top of your hair.
I couldn't agree more with what Avery, Windsurf and Bertrand de la Chapelle have put forward today. I am very concerned about the legitimacy of the whole IGF process. I would like to move forward with the idea of the Internet Governance Forum being a place where the agenda setting for the greater ideas, problems and concerns that we have can be debated and discussed. And for that reason, I think we need to develop a very, very good website, a tool that is a repository of the documents, everything that is discussed, a tool that facilitates. I'm particularly concerned with how government officials who participate in the IGF for the first time have such great difficulties in getting to know what has been discussed before, and so sometimes during main sessions we have to go back and explain, and I really think that we should be working more in that. I really think that during main sessions we could sort of make a trace for next year about what has been discussed during each of the main topics for the main session, so that we know how the IGF has evolved and how discussions have addressed different issues when they were critical, and more critical maybe at some point rather than others. So I think those are my contributions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It occurs to me that some other institutions like ICANN and the Internet Society have briefing sessions for people who have never been to those events before in order to introduce them to practices and procedures and history. Izumi.
おはようございます。ありがとう、ビントさん。もし僕が日本語で喋ったら皆さん理解できるでしょうか? What I'm saying is, good morning, Bint. Thank you. And my question was, what if I speak in Japanese? Can you understand? We are not under the 6 UN languages or 5. There are many more languages than the UN languages. I'm happy because I can talk with English and understand with you guys, but I think we also have to remind that there are other folks, other languages. My name is Izumi Aizu. I'm the co-coordinator of the Global Civil Society Net Governance Caucus. it's a pleasure to be also on the MAG since I'm the new MAG member. And I have to finish my term for the co-coordinator of the IGC, but I will continue for the MAG. From that point, first of all, I'd like to fully support what Jeremy said or pointed out about distribution rules of the documents. I'm not just saying about what happened here or there, but for the future, some clarification, very clear guidances. And I think MAG should be responsible for that part as well, to make no confusion, no misunderstanding, but exercise free speech as we like to here at IGF. Maybe it might be trivial, but some of the more logistical sides that we face, some network connection problems or other things, which I don't want to again go to any details, no blame games. But again, I feel like it's partially MAG's responsibility. We cannot just let the secretariat and local host do the good job and we just sleep. That's not the way it should be. That's how I feel. Now about the future of the IGF, I also would like to echo with Beltran for the several things. And I have the concern if I can convey, or you guys can convey to UNDESA, who I think is responsible mainly of the southern part of the IGF, and I'd like to hear from them if they are there. We don't have this special advisor for more than 2 years, as even though the UN General Assembly agreed to continue the mandate. So I really think it's your job, their job, that should be done immediately. We can't wait. We have a number of excellent candidates, perhaps on the podium, or maybe in this room, or if not in this building. So why not to accelerate? That I'd like to ask UN Secretary General, perhaps. Then, about the Secretariat. Yes, Chengeta has done marvelous jobs, and without you and your staff, we couldn't be here. But I don't want to put all the burden to you. I'd like to have much more support with the Executive Coordinator immediately also. And I'd like to hear why it's been taking so much long. What's going on under the transparency and openness and multi-stakeholder. These are guiding principles. Of course, it's kind of a taboo to say something sometimes. But we don't really understand. That's I'd like to state. And we need good accountability, explanation at least, and move forward very strongly soon. As for the MAG chair, as Beltran said, I think there's nothing prohibiting us from electing or selecting the chair. Maybe instead of having one chair, I'd like to propose perhaps 2 chairs. One from the south, one from the north, one from the east, one from the west, one from the government, one from the non-government, and one male and one female. I don't know if you can, solve all equations in one pack. I think you can. You can come up with some answer to that. Or anyway, we really need some leadership within MAG. Frankly speaking, we didn't really have that good leadership so far, and which I think related to some other issues we are facing. So I think I call for urgent action at the UN DESA level, and those who have a linkage to these DESA here, please push them. Thank you.
Thank you, Izumi. Let me take the gentleman on the left.
Thank you. I'm sorry for picking up the phone again. I would like to commend the facilitators on the table for having made such comprehensive and at the same time very precise assessment on the needs of the IGF for the future. But there are 2 points that I would like to reinforce and to concur with what was said by the facilitators. The first one is the need to assure the financial sustainability of the IGF. Everybody here has already agreed that there are a lot of challenges for the future, that the IGF has a lot to contribute to establishing principles to fostering the discussions of various in various levels, but nothing of this will be possible without financial sustainability. Then I could not agree more when Veit mentions that we should seek sources of financing. Not only the sources should also be multi-stakeholder. Brazil is one of the supporters, financial supporters of IGF, And when I mean Brazil, I do not mean the Brazilian government. The source of the financing from Brazil is also from a multi-stakeholder basis. Then I could not find words enough to encourage other parties to also find ways to help keeping IGF on a sound, financial, sustainable state. The other aspect is the issue of how to compile and how to take stock of all the knowledge that is produced during the IGF forums. I mean, this is a space where we have governments, we have academia, we have social society, private sector, all of them contributing in a very open manner. But we should not allow this open manner to be reflected in a lack of a formal way to make this knowledge available to everyone and to help make this knowledge be a help for the continuation of the process. During the IGF in Rio, we made an effort to compile the information that was produced, but that was many years ago. Probably today we would have more digital tools to allow this knowledge to be systematized and be used in favor of the process and in favor of all the stakeholders. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The lady over on my right.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. My name is Heather Dryden. I work for the Canadian Department of Industry. I'm also a member of the MAG, and I just wanted to make a couple of points, drawing on the exchanges we've had so far. First of all, in terms of hiring a UN Special Advisor and an executive coordinator for the Secretariat, we would agree that these are priorities and do have an impact on the sustainability of the IGF. And in terms of the discussions that have taken place regarding principles, this has been quite an interesting exchange and one that we've touched upon at previous IGFs. And we would agree that a compilation of those principles is a useful endeavor. And it does seem important that there be a way to organize those principles, and we can certainly make use of the technologies that we have available to us to facilitate that happening. And certainly I think it's worth underscoring that should be done in an open and multi-stakeholder way, and would have the benefit of being able to acknowledge work happening in various organizations and places. And that would include then taking in priorities that may exist in a particular region, say. And I think it's important to be able to depict that range of influences and thoughts about what are the principles that are most relevant to various parts of the world, and to acknowledge work taking place in different organizations or around those organizations. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Heather. The gentleman on the left.
Good morning. My name's Ian Fish from the UK, BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT. I'd like to go back to something that Vint Cerf said in his introduction, which was about the need for all stakeholders to be involved in a multi-stakeholder environment, and he gave an example of geography, effectively. But as well as geography, there is sectoral considerations and also the considerations of access through language, i.e. non-English speakers. And those are in order of difficulty, I think. Geography is the easiest one to do. The other two are less easy. I'd like to suggest that there is a need perhaps for the enhanced administration of this IGF to take some measures to try and increase the combination of all those three things. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a succinct suggestion. Over on the right, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. My name is Andrea Beccali. Good morning, everybody. Now with IFLA. I want just to take up what Bertrand just said. And I was thinking, let me just count the events in the WSIS process from now to 2015. And let me just list to you what I recall. Maybe someone else has more information. That's not the issue. it's not so easy to find information. So I counted WSIS WSIS plus 10 2013. There will be the UNESCO Geneva plus 10 event. And that will be in Paris. Within this event, there will be an event on internet governance also, on UNESCO-related issues we just learned. Then in May 2013, we have the WSIS Forum at ITU. In 2014, we will have again at ITU the WSIS plus 10 from Tunis plus 10. So 2005 plus 10, I don't think makes 2014, but in ITU kind of way of arranging things, it does make sense. Then there will be another WSIS forum at ITU in Geneva. Then there will be a 2015 big event, probably in New York, that's just my guess, for the 2015 conclusion thing. In the meantime, we have 3 IGF. So everybody speaks about convergence, and here I just see a spreading around of events that should actually speak about the same things and gather the same stakeholders. At the same time, if we go back into the WSIS process, we have seen that among the 3 UN leading agencies, UNDP got lost. It completely disappeared. UNESCO for other issues, but it's going to be weaker and weaker in the following years for budget issues. And ITU is the one that actually still has a solid financial and supportive group of member states. And most likely will take the lead of this whole series of events. I think it's really important to see how the IGF actually can be a catalyzer for a big conclusive 2015 event where you actually bring everything back together and you show how the multi-stakeholder process was extremely successful here, was developed, let's say, in a way outside the UN 3 main leading agencies, ITU, UNDP and UNESCO. We can also say that they mostly failed in that multi-stakeholder implementation as described in the Tunis agenda. And then one last thing about the Executive Secretary and the Chairman of the MAG. We all know that that's a gridlock in the UN. We all know that that's something that, for how much we praise the multi-stakeholder approach, is a matter of member states pushing the UN to get over this gridlock. And so I think it's time to acknowledge that. There was a recent change of the head of UNDESA, which became the umbrella organization of the IGF. That will be interesting that the governments are most active into the IGF, that really care about that. Then they have to play the game in New York and without keeping fooling each other and trying to find out alternative solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those reminders. The gentleman on the left.
Hello, my name is Cedric Wachholz. I work for UNESCO, and I would like to I wanted to take the floor before already, but I will respond directly to a few points made just by the person who spoke. I think UNESCO is extremely present, including at this event, and I would politely disagree with this assessment, with the ideas just mentioned. We have had several events organized here. We have launched 2 specific publications which were very much applauded. We had more than 100 people at the first session at the Freedom and Privacy publication launch. The 200 copies were gone in 1.5 days. And UNESCO is extremely present and will continue to be. Secondly, on the idea of having different parts together, and also responding to the proposal which Bertrand de la Chapelle made before. He mentioned the WSIS plus 10 review hosted by UNESCO from 25th to 27th February 2013. And this review will, on 28th February and 1st March, will follow the IGF meetings of the open consultation and the MAC meetings. So here you have a good example of how things can go together. Back to back. Let's put it like that. There will be, it's true, at the WSIS plus 10 review also a UNESCO special internet event on UNESCO themes. And this is also, that shows also the rather increasing interest of UNESCO in this domain. And for the overall WSIS review process, we have had online consultations on the themes, on the format, on process with many contributions from many stakeholders. And we will start next week with a submission of session proposals. So I would invite a submission of such a session proposal, which will be reviewed by a multi-stakeholder group, and it seems to have large support here anyway. So I'm very confident that such a compendium, if it exists by then, could well be discussed in a session proposed in this way and agreed upon by multi-stakeholders in the WSIS 2000 review event in February 2030. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments from the floor? I would make... oh, yes, please. Would you find a microphone, please?
I am Fargana Abdullaeva. I am from Azerbaijan National Academy of Science, Information Technology Institute. I want to say some words about useful orientation of IGF Forum. Firstly, I am very happy that this forum will hold in Azerbaijan. It is mean that our country participates in such important issue of internet. At second, this forum had been very useful for us and for all participants of forum. In this forum, we heard many interesting and progressive, also multiple points of view, many tasks which will be useful to participants and participants of forum. In this case, I want to thanks organizers and participants of forum for this wonderful opportunity to be among you. Thanks for attention. We will glad to see you in Baku again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm sure all of us hope to return. Are there any other comments from the floor? Please. If anyone wishes to make a comment, may I suggest that you queue at the microphone so that we speed this up? Yes, we're running out of time. I think this will have to be perhaps the... All right. At this point, we have one
Good
person...
morning. My name...
just a moment, please. We have one...
My name is Margiono.
Excuse me, could you stop for a minute?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. We have two people at the microphones. I am closing the microphones now because we're running out of time. So we take just these two, and that's it. Okay, so now it's your turn. Please go ahead. No, the gentleman over on my left first, and then the
Thank you.
gentleman.
Good morning. My name is Margiono from Indonesia Online Advocacy. It's fortunate for us that IGF will be held in my country next year and give opportunity to civil society in Indonesia to involve in discussion. But I think there is a concern related the spread of the country who participate in the IGF. Civil society and government of Indonesia involved in IGF for quite long years, for 3 or 2 years ago. But there are other countries in Southeast Asia and region, like in Vietnam, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, not involved. We have Asia Pacific Regional IGF, of course, but we don't have at Southeast Asia level. My question is how to expand the spread of the country, the government, and also civil society to involve in the IGF. If an IGF does not represent all the country of the member of the UN, not all the member of the UN are mandated to involve in the IGF, but involve them in the IGF will make the IGF more powerful, because involve them in discussion, such discussion, because it's important for other countries in Southeast Asia to bring them to discuss together in the IGF like this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We all hope for that objective. The gentleman on my right and the last speaker in this segment.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Wouter Natris. I'm reporting back on behalf of NL IGF on workshop 87. We organized a workshop on critical infrastructure and cross-border cooperation in the case of cross-border incidents. And we had a panel consisting everything from governments, the EU, the Council of Europe, the regulatory bodies, CERTs, industry. And we debated basically what happened with industry, where does law enforcement able to help? Well, there's one concern here which I think maybe we need to think about for 2013 and beyond. There is almost no regulatory body or law enforcement at this conference. So what are the topics that would actually interest them to come and debate with the rest of the multi-stakeholder community? So I think that is one. We debated around one central theme, and that is, does the world need a big internet treaty like the United Nations on the Open Sea Treaty, UNCLOS? And the vote in the panel was 8.5 to 1.5, because there was one gentleman saying, I don't know really. So that means everybody doesn't want one. We came up with several recommendations which I think may feed into themes for next year, and I will try to sum up the main important ones, and then I will thank you for your time, for my time. I think one main message was there are so many laws out there. Use the treaties and the laws that are around to their best of their ability, and come up with best practices in the international realm from those treaties and laws which are actually out there. The other one is to reach out and communicate to your other communities. Be a connector to other communities. Capacity building, but that is a theme which has been talked about so much that I won't repeat it here. I also said set priorities through national security strategies, because if a country does that, it will go for priorities where maybe now they're lacking. Where there are now a lot of EU projects, try and make them pan-EU, because there's so many countries which could benefit from the best practices coming out of EU projects. Fund the capacity building. That was also a comment that was made, because capacity builds all fine, but there's no funds to do that, then it won't happen. And I think one of the most important ones was get out of your silos. Everybody is at their own conference, talking their own topics, and we come here together and everybody flies home again, and what you actually make a difference. So we need meeting places in the world, people said, where we can actually meet more often and debate the issues. And that is I think once a year may not be enough, so could the IGF somehow organize subcommittees through the year in which people can actually meet and come up with the result of recommendations at the general meeting a year later. So that's a new concept, but something maybe the community actually needs. And as a last one, I think that is a very important message. The one gentleman from a regulatory body that was present in the panel said, my world is getting complicated every day. And if we wait another year, maybe 2 years from now, it's so complicated that we will never catch up again. So don't wait with acting for another year, for 2 years, 3 years, because the technical difficulties amount to enormously, he said. So that, I think, is a very important message to people who actually need to start acting. And that sums up the recommendations from my workshop, and I thank you for the time given to me.
Thank you very much for your concise report. I can't help but observing that if we keep the regulators thoroughly confused, maybe they'll leave us alone. Mr. Chairman, I turn this back over to you.
Thank you. I assume that in that case you don't want to make any concluding?
I think that the people here have exhibited enormous patience sitting through 3 hours of this. Yeah. I think we should draw a conclusion.
In that case, let me conclude this meeting that it was a very successful, to my mind, successful session. We have summarized well what has happened during the IGF here. Naturally, there was some comments concerning some negative sides, but there is always room for improvement, and we are happy that we can improve. And I am confident that these improvements will be there during the next IGF in 2013 in Indonesia. During these discussions, we have also mentioned that there are many workshops. We emphasize the importance of the dynamic coalitions and eventually the open forums. It was my understanding that there has been some request for MAG to take on some tasks for consideration about principles, about enhanced cooperation and implementation of recommendations, in no way as a subordinate to the CSCD, but on its own independent way. So there were calls for actions. Let me take this opportunity to express my special thanks to Constance Beaumeler for her dedicated work in organizing this session. She was extremely efficient and I really thank her. On this opportunity, let me thank the organizers, UNDESA, the Secretariat, and last but not least the host country, Azerbaijan, for the excellent venue, for the excellent organizations, even though we knew some hiccups, but that I think is almost natural. So I really thank you for your coming here to this session and contributing so extensively, and I hope to see you next year in Baku. Thank you. Just a minute. Let me give the floor to the chair to close the meeting.
It's my pleasure to thank all participants, all members of our board for participation in this meeting. I'm sure that you get a lot of information about the regulation of internet, and I'm sure also that this knowledge will help us to move ahead very fastly to get a best understanding of these principles and of how to better regulate internet. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. The next session starts at 4, which is the closing ceremony.
And there are workshops.
And there's still workshops going on, yeah. Right.